The Heisei era came to an end with Godzilla melting down, passing the atomic crown to his son, Godzilla Jr. Supercharged by the power of his fallen adopted father, the adolescent prince became king. But excluding shorts, we never get to see how the young Saurian would take up the mantle of King of the Monsters. Which begs the question, how would Junior differ from Godzilla? How would he evolve and grow if given the time? If he was forced to face new threats? What if Godzilla Jr. was in the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy? Now, to set the stage, there are a few things I would like to make clear to cleanly incorporate the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy into the Heisei era timeline. For one, just to make things simple, we'll assume the Cosmos and the Aliyahs are the same beings, guardians of Mothra who simply reincarnated due to their god's time on Earth coming to a close. We'll also assume Mothra was successful in destroying the asteroid which was set to hit the Earth in 1999. And upon her return, she birthed a new egg to replace her aging self. Now, I realize that a Mothra dying of old age at just 4 years old might sound a bit strange, but perhaps the space venture proved taxing on her body. That or Mothras just have generally short life cycles, just like in the Showa era. Whatever the reason for this swift lifespan, the other factor I want to make clear is that we are scaling the monsters featured in the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy to their Heisei era counterparts. Shockingly, the Rebirth of Mothra monsters are roughly Showa scaled, meaning if I didn't upscale these creatures, someone like Grand King Ghidorah looks less like a Grand King and more like a Short King when he's compared to someone like Heisei King Ghidorah. With all that said, we begin this tale with the Hokoku Logging Company in Hokkaido stumbling across an ancient Aliyah seal. Just like in the first film of the trilogy, Belvera wishes to use Ghidorah to destroy humanity. Thing is, here she actually has a good reason to want vengeance. With the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy now firmly connected to the Heisei era timeline, we can assume that Batra was Belvera's guardian. A guardian that did actively fight against humanity, and a Dark Protector which ultimately lost his life fighting a creation of man, aka Godzilla. Why this matters is that Belvera is far less playful with the Goto family. She'd acquire the seal and head to Hokkaido, avoiding the fight with her sisters and ultimately removing the Goto's family role in the Rebirth of Mothra's story. Now, this is not to say that humanity is on the sidelines. In fact, because Belvera is more focused on awakening Ghidorah, it probably forces Laura and Maul to turn to their psychic liaison for humanity. Not Miki Sayagusa, but Meru Ozawa. Remember, by the end of Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, Miki's psychic powers were in a state of decline. She'd probably still be running Japan's Psychic Center, but without her powers, she's not an effective contact for the Alliance. Thus, Miki would need to pass along the torch, so to speak, to a new psychic, that being Meru. Now, based on her personality and actions in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, Meru is far more direct and less secretive than Miki ever was. Thus, when the Alliance turns to her to help locate Belvera before it's too late, Meru doesn't keep this information to herself. The Japanese Self-Defense Force is made aware of the situation, but by the time they can organize a response to send troops or other units into the area and begin evacuating locals, Belvera makes her move. Fire splits rock and earth. Draconic whales tear through the heavens, signaling the rebirth of one hellish being, Ghidorah. Upon Infant Island, an elderly Mothra takes to the skies to combat the Draconic Devil, yet she is not the first opponent Ghidorah clashes against. That honor goes not to Godzilla Jr. either, but Japan's finest weapon of war, the Super X-3. An aerial vehicle brought on standby thanks to Meru's actions, and one that completely dominates the Molten Ghidorah. Just to be clear, I really can't stress enough how much this matchup would be in the favor of the Super X-3, to the point that Ghidorah doesn't really stand a chance. The mech dominates this battle. Sure, Ghidorah's fiery blasts are nothing to sneeze at. Even in his underpowered first form, he could set forests ablaze and spew fire rivaling the heat of magma. But compared to what Burning Godzilla could unleash, I can't see the dragon able to knock the Super X-3 out of the sky. Sure, he could use an energy pulse to break the ice which forms over blackened scales, but eventually, Ghidorah's reserves will run low. A tomb of ice will eventually swallow Ghidorah whole, but its grasp of him will not last forever. For one, Ghidorah can probably still siphon power through the ground, meaning he can draw forth the necessary energy to not only eventually break free of his icy prison, but evolve into his final form. The other issue here is Belvera, who, and this might sound hard to believe, but Garu Garu, the little steed that she flies, that little thing can reach speeds approaching Mach 1. So with the flight crew of the Super X3 thinking the fight is over with Destoroyah frozen, the Dark Elias can infiltrate the mech and cause a bit of chaos. In essence, Belvera can put the crew in the same hypnotic spell she used against the Goto family. So when Mothra finally does arrive on the scene, it's the Super X3 that greets her, and not in a friendly manner. She is blindsided and frozen, sheer cold, ending the elderly Moth. Maul and Laura are taken completely off guard by the death of their beloved guardian, unintentionally spurring Mothra's successor into action. Leo hatches early, spurred on by the death of his mother to end the chaos plaguing Hokkaido. Yet as he crosses the ocean, he finds himself not alone when atomic power illuminates the waters around him. Through the frantic waves off Hokkaido's coast, Godzilla Jr. arises. Reptile and Insect gaze upon the other, and Maul and Laura fear that Leo might just suffer the same fate as his mother, but that nightmare scenario just wouldn't play out in this situation, at least not with this Godzilla. Side note, but I'm going to be calling Godzilla Jr. Godzilla from this point onward, just to signify how he's taken the crown of his dad. This will make it easier to explain why I don't think Godzilla will attack Leo, and to point out why I have to bring up his upbringing and his future. Starting with the former, we see that at a young age, this Godzilla was far less hostile than his predecessor. Even as a dinosaur, Godzilla's father wasn't friendly towards humanity. Meanwhile, due to the positive experiences of his youth, Godzilla never once actively attacked mankind. The most aggressive thing Godzilla did throughout the entire Heisei era was hunt whales as a young adolescent, which you can't really fault a predator for doing. He needs to sustain himself after all, especially after the rapid growth he experienced due to Birth Island's destruction. Thus, when you note this more friendly personality with the fact that in the future, when Gigan Rex and his army descend upon Earth, Mickey's voice explicitly states that Japan has enjoyed a quarter century of peace, something I don't think that would have transpired if Godzilla's father had continued to live. Thus, the only conclusion that can be drawn is that this Godzilla views humanity as an ally, not an enemy. A people he will protect when grand dangers descend upon those that live in his territory, like Destoroyah. All that is to say, when Godzilla finds Leo, he's not going to blast him, he's going to help the larva against the draconic threat he senses in Hokkaido. So Mothra Leo comes ashore with Godzilla by his side. Now the Super X3 would be a problem for the pair, but with the element of surprise gone, I can't see the crew remaining under Belvera's control in the hours after Mothra's death. For one, Maul and Laura would definitely attempt to free the pilots. On the other hand, Meru and the Psychic Institute would also use their unified telepathic power to shatter Belvera's control. Whichever path is ultimately successful doesn't really matter. Either way, the crew are freed and ordered back to base to avoid falling under Belvera's control once more, leaving Godzilla and Leo open and free to combat a thawing Destoroyah. Now, I'm going to be charitable and assume that Destoroyah, without having to fight Mothra and Leo for hours upon hours through the night and into the morning, can instead use that saved power to evolve into his flying form. The reason I do this is because even at Destoroyah's best, he can't compete with the power Godzilla is packing. I mean, having absorbed the excess radiation of Meltdown Godzilla, at a bare minimum, this Godzilla would contain some serious power. Now personally, I don't buy that Godzilla in his base form is more powerful than his father in his Meltdown state. But what I definitely can believe is that this Godzilla is stronger than his father in his base form. You know, a monster which tangled with Space Godzilla for an entire night. Why I stress this is because we can use Heisei Mothra as a rough benchmark to gauge Destoroyah's power. Both Godzilla's dad and Destoroyah busted Mothra Heisei rather quickly. Thing is, the Atomic Leviathan's father only grew more powerful in the years following that fight. Thus, there would be a wide gap between the two, akin to Leo's original fight with the Molten Hydra. So with unmatched regeneration, ample atomic reserves, and a level of stubbornness inherited from dear old dad, I honestly can't see Godzilla being bested here. Sure, Destoroyah is fast and could blindside Godzilla just like Heisei Ghidorah did to his dad. But once Destoroyah is on the ground, overwhelming physical strength and nuclear reserves will ensure the dragon never becomes airborne again. While I haven't mentioned him so far, I should also say that Leo in his larva form should be able to assist Godzilla here, ensuring that Destoroyah never gets a moment to recover. Thus, atomic light seals Destoroyah's fate, turning the once mighty molten beast to ash and memory. Godzilla and Leo thus part ways as allies, with the former having defended his newfound territory compared to Leo, who successfully avenged his fallen mother. Belvera slinks away in the chaos, and a year passes by without incident. Leo would likely still develop in that time into a powerful Imago Mothra, one who actively guards the world just as a new threat emerges beneath the waves. Apologies for the brief interruption, but by far most of you are not subscribed. To stay up to date with the newest scenarios, please consider doing so. Thank you. It's not a threat Mothra Leo would need to concern himself with. If Dagara's awakening off the coast of Okinawa didn't alert Godzilla to something stirring within his territory, then the destruction of what is most likely a US nuclear submarine would. And once Godzilla finds what Dagara left behind, a very ticked off king would most likely clash against the undersea Emerald Devil. Unlike Destoroyah here, Dagara is closer to Godzilla's level of power. Couple that with his greater agility within the ocean, variety of offensive techniques, and the fact that his Barum could drain the nuclear Leviathan of energy in a prolonged conflict, just like he did with Mothra Leo, means the toxic dragon has a real shot at winning this fight. At least he would have if not for the destruction of that submarine from earlier. Because all that radiation unleashed by said vessel's destruction, useless to a creature like Dagara, would be quickly siphoned and put to use by Godzilla. And because of this infusion of energy, I can't see Dagara outlasting a freshly rejuvenated Godzilla, especially if this infusion of fresh radiation helps unlock a white-hot dormant rage within the King of the Monsters, akin to how the Red Spiral Ray was unlocked by Rodan's sacrifice. Safe to say, Dagara vanishes by blinding atomic power. As a result, the Elias and the kids probably never get to Nilai Kanai. The ancient city never rises, and Gorgo probably just admits that he was the treasure all along. And I mean, that was kind of a pointless venture now, wasn't it? If he was the treasure all along, he could have just helped. Anyway, you might be asking what happened to Belvera. And unlike in the original trilogy, Mo and Laura pursued and fixed their relationship with their shared sibling after their confrontation with Destoroyah. And you can place the credit of this reconciliation squarely on the shoulders of Meru Ozawa. Especially with what happened after the Super X3, I think she would actively try to fix, or at least ensure Belvera isn't a threat to humanity going forward. And with dozens of psychics at the Institute, one can surmise Meru would eventually track down Belvera's whereabouts on Earth, allowing Maul and Laura to work out their differences and help soothe Belvera's dark soul, at least before it's too late. Thus, when a certain King of Terror descends from the stars, Belvera doesn't steal her part of the Elias Triangle. Instead, she reveals the weapon to her sisters to ultimately use against Grand King Ghidorah. Terror soars over Japan. Jets and other weapons of war fall victim to Ghidorah's golden might, as the Japanese self-defense force scramble to combat the Eradicator of Life. Sadly, everything they can throw at Grand King Ghidorah would be turned to ash, including the Super X3. Before you attack me with pitchforks, I know that sounds heretical, but the aerial vessel shielding is meant for heat and radiation, two traits not shared with Grand King Ghidorah's gravity beams. And there wouldn't be any mech or Mogera 2 to launch against Grand King Ghidorah even by the year 1998, as they used the last scraps of the Futurian tech in Mogera. Sure, they might have a new aerial vessel, but I can't imagine its firepower or durability standing up to Grand King Ghidorah's might. But hope returns when Mothra Leo soars over the horizon, and yeah, that hope also vanishes when Grand King Ghidorah easily swats Leo out of the sky. Remember, Gorgo never sacrificed himself to transform Leo from his normal Imago state into the rainbow form. So Leo is fighting in his base form, which, doesn't bode well for the Guardian. If Grand King Ghidorah actually took the fight seriously, then Leo wouldn't last long. Luckily for Leo, he probably survives this encounter due to Grand King Ghidorah finding the Guardian more a plaything than an actual challenge, giving time for Godzilla to arrive on the scene. Atomic Leviathan and Malevolent Dragon come to blows, and it's here the King of the Monsters ultimately finds his limits tested against the King of Terror's unyielding might. Godzilla's superior strength, regeneration, and unbreakable will can test Grand King Ghidorah's destructive firepower, experience, and variety of abilities. The real problem Godzilla has going into this fight is Grand King Ghidorah's light barrier, a wall of light which automatically dulls any beam headed the tyrant's way. Now, given enough time and enough blackened scales, Godzilla could dampen Grand King Ghidorah's greatest asset, But that would not happen immediately, and in that time frame, Godzilla has to survive all the punishment Grand King Ghidorah can dish out. If you were watching from the sidelines like the Japanese self-defense force would be in this situation, you wouldn't be able to discern who is winning. Luckily for mankind, the distraction is probably enough for the army to break the children out of the King of Terror's dome, with a few casualties along the way. It's likely then that all three Elias, after watching Leo get beat down and Godzilla currently contesting Grand King Ghidorah's might, would feel compelled to bestow the Elias Triangle to Leo to help even the playing field. I mean, the Elias could try to help Godzilla instead, but I can imagine the amount of firepower being levied across the battlefield would act as a strong deterrent. Thus, they bestow Leo with the unlocked potential of the Elias Triangle, all of Maul's courage, Belvera's wisdom, and Laura's love, granting the Guardian a new form. Mothra, Leo, Trinity. You may be asking, well, how strong is this Mothra, Leo, Trinity? And in my opinion, I'd say stronger than Rainbow, but not quite on the same level as Armor. Do remember that Leo doesn't have the buff from Gorgo here, not to mention while we see the Elias Triangle deflect Grand King Ghidorah's gravity beams, protecting a tiny target versus one that is kaiju sized requires a far greater amount of power. While no doubt powerful, wherever Leo ends up on the power scale, I think his greatest contribution to the ongoing conflict would be giving Godzilla time to adapt, to grow, and ultimately to harness a technique he wouldn't have access to for decades. White, glistening power takes hold of Godzilla, and as shining atomic energy fills the heavens, the surge overwhelms Grand King Ghidorah's light barrier, reducing the King of Terror's ambitions and body to ash. And so vanish the threats of the present. But one might ask, what about those in the future? Well, put simply, Godzilla, having unlocked his potential decades earlier, now has a far longer time to master said state. Gigan Rex and his underlings wouldn't stand that much of a chance, especially with Mothra, Leo, Trinity by Godzilla's side. Megalon, though, would be far more interesting. If Laura and Maul can possibly help mediate Seatopia's woes across the surface world, then Megalon wouldn't attack Japan or Godzilla. In fact, depending on the success of the Elias, we might see Megalon become another guardian of Earth, a steadfast protector ready to stand beside Godzilla and Mothra Leo against whatever threats the future may hold. And to be honest, I'm really hoping we get another short so I can expand this timeline in the near future. So what would happen if Godzilla Jr. entered the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy? Well, he would ultimately steal a bit of Leo's thunder, ensuring the Moth never reaches the same peaks as he did in the original trilogy. But at the cost of this power, the Earth would gain a protector, one whose might eclipses his predecessor, ensuring the planet's safety well into the future. And that concludes this What If. The next video on the docket will be what if Godzilla Jr. was in Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. And if you'd like to submit your own scenario, or vote on the upcoming releases that will be featured on the channel, like what if Zilla was in the Monsterverse Part 2, which will be releasing in the start of January, become a member today. If not, totally understand, but please like and subscribe to ensure more content like this continues into the future. But until then, I'm GrayShot151, and I'll catch you all next time. Until then, later.